The Boeing 737 shuddered violently as Samantha Walsh jerked awake in seat 12B, her military-trained reflexes immediately cataloging the wrongness of the aircraft's motion. The vibration wasn't turbulence. She'd felt enough of that in her 8 years, flying FA-18 Super Hornets off aircraft carriers. This was mechanical failure, and her blood ran cold as the passenger cabin lights flickered ominously overhead. Around her, fellow passengers were beginning to stir with confused murmurs, their afternoon naps interrupted by the increasingly erratic behavior of Flight 447 from Denver to Seattle. The middle-aged businessman in 12 gripped his armrest with white knuckles, while the college student in 12C pulled out her earbuds with a frown. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. But Samantha heard something else that made her stomach drop, a subtle change in the engine pitch that spoke of serious trouble. Her trained ear caught the irregular rhythm of the port engine, a stuttering whine that meant catastrophic failure was imminent. She pressed her face to the small window, peering past the wing toward the engine nacelle. Even from her limited vantage point, she could see something was terribly wrong. The intercom crackled to life with a burst of static that made several passengers jump. Captain Morrison's voice came through, professionally calm, but with an underlying tension that Samantha recognized from her own emergency situations over hostile territory. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some technical difficulties and will need to make an unscheduled landing. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for..." The announcement cut off abruptly as the aircraft lurched sideways, sending service carts careening down the aisle and passengers crying out in alarm. Through her window, Samantha watched in horror as chunks of metal began peeling away from the port engine cowling, glinting in the afternoon sunlight as they tumbled toward the Colorado mountains 30,000 feet below. Then came the words that would change everything. "Any military aviators aboard this flight, please identify yourselves to the flight crew immediately. We have an emergency situation in the cockpit." Samantha's heart hammered against her ribs as she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her legs steady despite the aircraft's increasingly violent movements. 8 years of carrier landings in rough seas had taught her to find her balance in impossible conditions. Around her, passengers were beginning to panic as the reality of their situation set in. "Ma'am, please remain seated," called Flight Attendant Jessica Chun from the forward galley, her professional smile strained as she struggled to secure loose items while the plane pitched and rolled. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Samantha Walsh, U.S. Navy," Samantha called back, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death situations. "I'm responding to the captain's request." Jessica's eyes widened with relief. She'd been a flight attendant for 12 years, but had never experienced anything like this. The training scenario suddenly felt woefully inadequate as she watched. The confidence in Samantha's movements. This woman clearly knew what she was doing in a crisis. "Follow me," Jessica said, leading Samantha toward the cockpit through the increasingly chaotic cabin. Passengers were clutching their armrests, some praying, others frantically texting what they feared might be final messages to loved ones. The businessman from 12 grabbed Samantha's arm as she passed. "Are we going to die?" he whispered, his face ashen. Samantha paused, meeting his terrified gaze. "Not if I have anything to say about it," she replied firmly, her conviction cutting through his panic. It was the same tone she'd used to reassure her squadron mates during combat missions over Syria, and it had the same effect now. The man's grip loosened, and some color returned to his cheeks. At the cockpit door, Jessica knocked in the special pattern that identified her as crew. The door opened immediately, revealing Captain Dave Morrison, a 20-year airline veteran whose usual calm demeanor was cracking under pressure. His co-pilot, First Officer Sarah Kim, was frantically working through emergency checklists while monitoring, multiple warning lights that painted the instrument panel in ominous reds and yellows. "Thank God," Morrison said, relief evident in his voice as he saw Samantha's confident bearing. "What's your background?" 8 years naval aviation, FA-18 Super Hornet pilot, Samantha replied, already scanning the instrument panel with trained eyes. The situation was worse than she'd feared. 3 deployments, 2 combat tours. What's our status? Port engine failure, complete loss of hydraulic system A, and we're losing system B fast, Morrison reported, sweat beading on his forehead. Sarah's been flying for 6 years, but nothing like this. My hands. He held up his right hand, which was trembling uncontrollably. 23 years of flying, and my body picks now to remind me I'm 61 years old. Samantha understood. Immediately. Morrison was experiencing the kind of stress response that could incapacitate even experienced pilots. She'd seen it before in combat good aviators whose bodies betrayed them at the worst possible moment. The captain was still functional, but operating at reduced capacity. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to assist with the emergency approach," Samantha said, her mind already racing through contingency plans. "I've handled similar hydraulic failures in far more challenging conditions." "You've got it," Morrison replied without hesitation. "Sarah, brief Commander Walsh on our current situation." First Officer Kim looked up from her checklist, her face pale but determined. "We're at 31,000 feet, approximately 40 minutes out from Denver International. The port engine seized and threw shrapnel into the hydraulic lines. We've got partial control authority, but the aircraft is becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Weather at Denver is clear, winds light and variable." Samantha nodded, processing the information rapidly. "Fuel status?" 22,000 pounds, Kim replied. "Enough for multiple approach attempts if needed." "Good. Have you declared an emergency with a TC?" "Affirmative. We're cleared direct to Denver, emergency handling, and they're rolling the equipment." Samantha slid into the observer's seat behind the center console, her eyes moving systematically across the instruments. The hydraulic pressure gauges told the story System A was completely dead, and System B was showing intermittent pressure that could fail completely at any moment. If that happened, they'd be flying on manual reversion, which would require tremendous physical strength to control the aircraft. "Captain, recommend we start our descent now while we still have some hydraulic assistance," Samantha advised. "If we lose System B at altitude, this becomes exponentially more difficult." Morrison nodded, keying his radio. "Denver approach, southwest 447, requesting immediate descent to 10,000 feet. We need to get down while we still have control." "Authority. Southwest 447, cleared to descend and maintain 10,000 feet. Squawk 7,700 and report your souls on board and fuel remaining." 147 souls on board. Fuel remaining 2 hours, Morrison replied, his voice steadier now that they had a clear plan of action. As the aircraft began its descent, Samantha studied the approach plates for Denver International. Runway 35L would be their best option, long enough to handle a hot landing if the brakes weren't fully functional and aligned with the wind. But first, they had to get there. The aircraft shuddered again, more violently this time, and Samantha felt the yaw that indicated asymmetric thrust from the failed engine. Morrison was fighting to keep the wings level, his hands white-knuckled on the control yoke. "Let me take it for a moment," Samantha said quietly, reaching for the controls. Morrison hesitated for just an instant, his pride as captain warring with the recognition that she might be better equipped to handle the situation, then nodded and released the yoke. The moment Samantha's hands touched the controls, she felt the aircraft's pain. Every pilot knew the sensation of a sick airplane, and this 737 was dying by degrees. The control surfaces were heavy and unresponsive, requiring constant pressure to maintain level flight. But she'd flown aircraft in worse condition. Her Super Hornet had once taken a surface-to-air missile that shredded her port stabilizer, and she'd still managed to make it back to the carrier. Feel that? She asked Morrison, who was watching. Her technique intently. She wants to roll left and nose down. The trick is to anticipate it instead of reacting to it. Stay ahead of the airplane. Morrison nodded, understanding. He'd known pilots who could do this, aviators who seemed to merge with their aircraft, who could feel what the machine needed before the instruments showed it. He'd never been one of them, but he recognized the talent when he saw a dot in the cabin behind them. The passengers were beginning to understand the severity of their situation. The steady drone of normal flight had been replaced by ominous mechanical sounds and periodic violent movements that sent stomachs lurching. Flight attendant Chen moved through the cabin with practiced calm, checking seatbelts and preparing passengers for what might come. Dr. Michael Hendricks, a trauma surgeon returning from a medical conference in Denver, identified himself to the flight crew and began mentally preparing for potential casualties. He'd treated crash survivors before and knew that the next hour would determine whether he'd be helping with minor injuries or something far worse. In seat 23F, retired Air Force. Master Sergeant Robert Bull Kowalski gripped his armrest and stared out the window at the Colorado landscape below. 30 years of military service had taught him to recognize when things were going sideways, and every instinct told him this was one of those times. He began quietly organizing the passengers around him, his natural leadership qualities taking over even in civilian clothes. Back in the cockpit, Samantha was establishing a rhythm with the wounded aircraft. Every few seconds, she had to input control corrections to maintain straight and level flight, but she was finding the pattern. The key was understanding that the airplane was no longer a precision instrument. It had become something more like a wounded animal that needed careful, patient handling. "Sarah, I need you to calculate our approach speed," Samantha instructed the first officer. "With the hydraulic issues, we're going to be flying this thing manually all the way to the runway. We need to know our exact numbers." Kim nodded, pulling out her quick reference handbook. "With our current weight and configuration, normal approach speed would be 130 knots. But with the hydraulic failures, add 20 knots to account for reduced control authority," Samantha advised. "We need enough energy to muscle this airplane around if we have to make corrections close to the ground." Morrison was listening to this exchange with growing respect for the young naval aviator. She wasn't just flying the airplane, she was thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating problems before they materialized. It was exactly the kind of planning that separated good pilots from great ones. The radio crackled with Denver Approach Control's voice. "Southwest 447. We have emergency equipment standing by. Runway 35L is close to all other traffic. Winds are calm, visibility 10 miles. Report when you have the airport in sight." "Southwest 447. We're still descending through 15,000 feet, Morrison replied. "Request vectors to final approach course when ready." As they continued their descent, Samantha began explaining her strategy to Morrison and Kim. "We're going to fly a modified approach higher and faster than normal, with a long final to give. U.S. time to set up properly. No heroics, no short field techniques. We use every inch of that runway." "What about the landing?" Kim asked. "If the brakes aren't fully functional... Then we roll long," Samantha replied matter-of-factly. "Denver's got runways for days, and there's nothing but empty taxiways beyond 35L. Better to roll into the grass at walking speed than try to force a short landing and lose control." The aircraft shuddered again, and this time they heard a grinding noise from somewhere in the belly of the machine. Morrison's eyes widened as more warning lights illuminated the panel. "There goes hydraulic system B," he announced grimly. "We're down to manual reversion." Samantha felt the change immediately as the controls became even heavier and more sluggish. Now it would take physical strength to fly the approach, and any control inputs would have to be deliberate and well planned. There would be no room for small corrections or subtle adjustments. "Captain, I need you and Sarah to help me with the controls during the approach," she said, her voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "We're going to need all the muscle we can get, especially during the flare and touchdown." Morrison nodded, understanding. He'd heard of situations like this, but never experienced one. Flying on manual reversion was like trying to arm wrestle. A giant, it required everything a pilot had, both physically and mentally. Through the cockpit windows, the Colorado landscape was spreading out below them as they descended through 10,000 feet. The mountains looked deceptively peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, their snow-capped peaks gleaming against the blue sky. But Samantha knew that peaceful appearance was an illusion. They were flying over some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America, and any mistake now would likely be fatal for everyone aboard. "Denver in sight," Morrison announced, spotting the airport complex in the distance. The parallel runways stretched across the prairie like concrete ribbons, surrounded by the sprawling infrastructure of one of the nation's busiest airports. "Southwest 447, turn right heading 040, descend and maintain 6,000 feet. You're cleared for the visual approach to runway 35L. Right turn 040, descending to 6,000. Cleared visual approach runway 35L. Morrison acknowledged. Samantha began the turn, fighting against the aircraft's tendency to overroll. The manual reversion system meant that every control input was amplified and delayed, requiring her to think far ahead of the airplane's current attitude. It was like trying to steer a ship in a hurricane, possible, but requiring tremendous skill and concentration. 10 miles out, Kim announced, monitoring their progress on the navigation display. Altitude 6,000, speed 170 knots. Start. Configuring for landing, Samantha instructed. Flaps 10 degrees, landing gear down. But do it slowly, we don't want any surprises. As the flaps extended and the landing gear lowered, the aircraft's handling characteristics changed again. The additional drag required more power from the remaining engine, and the asymmetric thrust made the airplane even more difficult to control. Samantha found herself constantly working the rudder pedals to maintain directional control. 5 miles. Out, altitude 4,000, Kim reported. On glide path, on centerline. Despite the desperate circumstances, Samantha was flying one of the most precise approaches of her career. Years of carrier landings had taught her to maintain exact parameters regardless of conditions, and that training was serving her well. Now, but she knew the real test would come during the final approach and landing. That's when the reduced control authority would matter most. In the cabin, the passengers could sense they were approaching their destination. The aircraft's descent was obvious, and many were pressing their faces to windows for glimpses of the airport below. The mood was tense but hopeful. They were almost down, almost safe. Flight attendant Chen made her way through the cabin one final time, ensuring everyone was properly secured for landing. She paused at seat 23F, where Master Sergeant Kowalski sat ramrod straight, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. "How bad is it up there?" he asked quietly, his experienced eyes reading her expression. Chen hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Bad enough that they need help flying the airplane, but the pilot they have ... She glanced toward the cockpit. "She knows what she's doing." Kowalski nodded slowly. He'd served with enough naval aviators to know their reputation for competence under pressure. If anyone could get them down safely, it would be someone with that background. 2 miles out. Altitude 2,000, Kim announced. Runway in sight, on glide path. Samantha could see runway 35L stretched out ahead of them. A reassuring strip of concrete surrounded by emergency vehicles with flashing lights. But she also noticed something that made her frown. The cross-windsock near the approach end was showing a slight wind from the right, not the calm conditions reported by the tower. "Captain, check the winds again," she requested. "I'm seeing a crosswind indication." Morrison keyed his radio. "Tower, Southwest 447, requesting current wind conditions. Southwest 447, winds now 050 at 8 knots, gusting to 12. Runway 35L cleared to land. A crosswind. Not significant under normal conditions, but potentially problematic with their reduced control authority." Samantha quickly ran through her options. They could request a different runway, but that would mean flying a longer approach and burning more fuel. Better to continue with 35 liters and compensate for the crosswind during the landing. 1 mile final. 500 feet, 150 knots, Kim called out, her voice tense with concentration. This was it, the moment that would determine whether they walked away from this emergency or became another aviation statistic. Samantha could feel the weight of 147 lives depending on her skill and judgment. But rather than adding pressure, it sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. The runway grew larger in the windscreen, and Samantha began the most critical phase of the approach. Everything depended on the next 60 seconds. 50 feet, 40, 30. First Officer Kim called out the radio altimeter readings as the wounded Boeing 737 descended toward runway 35L. Samantha's hands were cramped from fighting the heavy controls, but her concentration remained absolute. She could see the runway, threshold markings rushing toward them, and the crosswind was pushing them slightly left of centerline. 20 feet, 15. Kim continued, her voice tight with tension. At 10 feet above the runway, Samantha began the flare, pulling back on the yoke to arrest their descent. But the manual reversion system meant the control response was sluggish and unpredictable. The aircraft ballooned slightly, floating higher than intended as the ground effect altered the airflow over the wings. Too high, Morrison muttered, instinctively reaching for his controls. "I've got it," Samantha replied firmly, pushing the nose down slightly to regain the proper descent rate. The main landing gear touched down hard on the concrete, sending a shudder through the entire aircraft structure. But they were down the first. Hurdle cleared. Now came the challenge of stopping a heavy aircraft with potentially compromised brakes on a runway still slick from morning frost. Samantha immediately deployed the speed brakes and reverse thrust on the functioning engine, while Morrison worked the wheel brakes with careful pressure. "Brakes are mushy but functional," Morrison reported as they rolled down the runway at what felt like highway speed. "We're slowing, but not fast." Through the cockpit windows, they could see emergency vehicles racing alongside the runway, keeping pace with the aircraft as it continued its long rollout. Samantha worked the rudder pedals constantly to maintain directional control, fighting the asymmetric reverse thrust that wanted to pull them off the centerline. "Speed 100 knots and decreasing," Kim announced, monitoring their deceleration. 80 knots, 70, 60. At 40 knots, with more than half the runway behind them, Samantha finally felt confident they would stop safely on the FIO. Concrete. The aircraft rolled to a complete stop with less than 1,000 feet of runway, remaining closer than anyone would have liked, but well within the safety margins. "Southwest 447, are you able to taxi clear of the runway?" The control tower asked. Morrison keyed his microphone. "Negative, tower. We're going to shut down here and evacuate on the runway. We're not sure about the structural integrity of the aircraft after that engine failure." "Roger, Southwest 447. Emergency crews are approaching your position now." "Outstanding job, folks." As the engines wound down and the cockpit fell silent except for the cooling sounds of stressed metal, The magnitude of what they'd accomplished began to sink in. Samantha slumped back in the observer seat, suddenly feeling the exhaustion that adrenaline had been masking. "Commander Walsh," Morrison said quietly, turning to face her. "I've been flying for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like that. You saved every life on this airplane." Samantha shook her head modestly. "We all did it together, Captain. Sarah's navigation, your experience managing the emergency, it was a team effort. But First Officer Kim wasn't having any of that modesty. Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been flying with Captain Morrison for 2 years, and we both know we were in over our heads. You didn't just help, you took command of an impossible situation and made it possible." Through the cockpit windows, they could see the emergency crews surrounding the aircraft, their practiced efficiency evident as they prepared for a precautionary evacuation. Fire trucks positioned themselves near the failed engine, foam cannons ready in case of any residual fire risk. In the cabin, the passengers were beginning to react to their survival with a mixture of relief, tears, and nervous laughter. Many were already pulling out phones to call loved ones, desperate to share the news that they'd made it safely to the ground. Dr. Hendricks moved through the cabin with his medical bag, checking on passengers who might have been injured during the rough landing or the turbulent flight. Most were dealing with nothing more than stress and minor bruises, though he found several elderly passengers showing signs of mild shock that would need monitoring. Master Sergeant Kowalski had naturally assumed a leadership role in organizing the evacuation, his military training taking over as he helped Flight Attendant Chun prepare passengers for the emergency slides. Even though the aircraft had landed safely, protocol required an evacuation when there was any doubt about structural integrity or fire risk. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chun announced over the cabin intercom, "we've landed safely at Denver International Airport, but as a precautionary measure, we'll be evacuating the aircraft using the emergency slides. Please follow the instructions of the crew and leave all personal belongings behind." The evacuation proceeded with remarkable order, considering the stress everyone had endured. Passengers moved quickly but calmly down the slides, many turning back to look at the aircraft that had carried them through their ordeal. The failed port engine was clearly visible, its cowling partially torn away and several panels missing entirely. Samantha was among the last to leave the cockpit, after ensuring that all aircraft systems were properly secured. As she walked through the now empty cabin, she could see personal items scattered by the violent movements during the emergency magazines, tablets, coffee cups, and the small mementos of interrupted lives. On the tarmac, passengers were being processed by airport medical personnel and airport security, but many lingered near the aircraft, reluctant to leave the scene of their shared experience. Several approached Samantha as she descended the emergency slide, recognizing her as the woman who had gone to the cockpit during the crisis. "Thank you," said the businessman from seat 12A, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what you did up there, but thank you." Similar expressions of gratitude came from other passengers, but Samantha deflected them with characteristic military humility. In her mind, she'd simply done what any trained pilot would do in the circumstances, though deep down, she knew that wasn't entirely true. The skills required to handle that emergency were rare, even among professional aviators. Airport operations personnel were already coordinating with the National Transportation Safety Board to secure the accident scene. The failed engine would undergo extensive analysis to determine the exact cause of the failure, while the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder would be downloaded to reconstruct the complete sequence of events. Captain Morrison found Samantha near the terminal, where she was giving her initial statement to an NTSB investigator. He waited patiently until the official interview was complete, then approached with First Officer Kim. "Commander, I wanted to thank you again," Morrison said, extending his hand. "But I also wanted to ask, what are your plans now? I mean, are you still active duty?" Samantha shook his hand, puzzled by the question. I'm actually transitioning out of the Navy next month. I've got a job lined up with a defense contractor in Seattle, doing test pilot work on unmanned systems. Have you ever considered commercial aviation? Kim asked. Because after what I saw today, I think you'd be wasted anywhere else. The suggestion caught Samantha off guard. She'd never seriously considered airline flying. It had always seemed too routine, too predictable after the high-stakes world of naval aviation. But as she looked back at Flight 447, now surrounded by investigators and emergency personnel, she realized that commercial aviation could offer its own unique challenges and rewards. I've got a proposal for you, Morrison said, pulling out his business card. I know people at every major airline, and after today, any of them would be thrilled to have you. Think about it, you could be helping to train the next generation of pilots, sharing the kind of skills that saved lives today. Samantha pocketed the card, though she wasn't sure she'd ever use it. Her plans were set. The defense contractor job offered good money and the chance to work on cutting-edge technology. But something about Morrison's suggestion nagged at her. As she waited for her transportation to the hotel, where the airline was putting up stranded passengers, the local news crews had arrived at Denver International Airport, drawn by reports of the dramatic emergency landing. Samantha watched from inside the terminal as reporters interviewed passengers, many of whom mentioned the female pilot who helped save the plane. She cringed at the attention, preferring the anonymity that had always been part of military life. Dr. Hendricks approached her as she waited for her luggage to be retrieved from the aircraft. Commander Walsh, I wanted to thank you personally. I'm a trauma surgeon, and I know what happens when aircraft accidents go wrong. What you did today prevented a tragedy. Just doing my job, Doctor, Samantha replied, though she realized as she said it that it hadn't been her job at all. She'd been a passenger, nothing more. The Navy had trained her well enough that helping in an emergency had become instinctive. Well, if you ever decide you want to make it your job full-time, Hendricks said, handing her his card, I sit on the board of Mountain Medical Air Transport. We're always looking for experienced pilots who can handle pressure. What we do isn't as dramatic as what happened today, but we save lives every flight. Another option, another possibility she hadn't considered. Samantha was beginning to realize that her experience today had opened doors she hadn't known existed. But for now, she just wanted to get to her hotel, call her parents to let them know she was safe, and try to process everything that had happened. As evening fell over Denver, the passengers of Flight 447 were scattered across the city, some catching later flights to continue their journeys, others choosing to rent cars or extend their stays. But they were united by their shared experience. A bond forged in the crucible of genuine peril and collective survival. Samantha sat in her hotel room, staring at the two business cards on the nightstand, Morrison's airline contacts and Dr. Hendricks' medical transport company. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from news outlets, somehow managed to get her number, plus messages from family and friends who'd seen the story on the news. She ignored the media calls, but returned the family messages first. Her mother cried when she heard Samantha's voice, having spent hours watching news coverage and fearing the worst. Her father, a retired Marine pilot himself, wanted to hear every detail of the emergency procedures. I'm proud of you, kiddo, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I'm not surprised. We taught you well, and the Navy finished the job. As she prepared for bed, Samantha found herself replaying the day's events, analyzing her decisions and wondering if she could have done anything differently. It was a habit ingrained by years of military debriefings, the constant pursuit of perfection that defined professional aviators. But for the first time since leaving the Navy, she was also thinking about her future in a different way. The defense contractor job suddenly seemed less appealing, less meaningful. Today had reminded her why she'd become a pilot in the first place. not for the technology or the salary, but for the incredible responsibility and privilege of holding lives in her hands. The thought followed her into sleep, where she dreamed of aircraft in distress and runways that stretched toward uncertain horizons. 3 weeks after the emergency landing of Flight 447, Samantha Walsh found herself sitting in the chief pilot's office at TransContinental Airlines in Seattle, staring at a job offer that would change everything she thought she knew about her future. The defense contractor position that had seemed so certain suddenly felt like a path not taken. "Commander Walsh, I'm going to be direct with you," said Captain Janet Rodriguez, TransCon's chief pilot and a former Air Force transport pilot herself. "What you did on that flight was extraordinary, but what impressed me more was how you handled the aftermath. No media interviews, no book deals, no attempts to capitalize on your 15 minutes of fame. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Samantha shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair, still unused to being the center of attention. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of official investigations, media requests, and job offers from companies she'd never heard of. The NTSB investigation had praised her actions, and the flight crew of 447 had been equally effusive in their testimony about her role in the successful emergency landing. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I've never seriously considered commercial aviation," Samantha replied honestly. "My background is military fighters, test flying, high-performance aircraft. I'm not sure how well that translates to airline operations." Rodriguez smiled, recognizing the sentiment. 20 years ago, I was sitting where you are now, fresh out of the Air Force and convinced that flying cargo planes around the world was somehow beneath my training. I was wrong, Commander. Commercial aviation isn't just about getting passengers from point A to point B. It's about bringing people home safely every single day. That's a mission worthy of any pilot's skills. Through the office windows, Samantha could see the bustling activity of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Aircraft of all sizes taxied past regional jets, wide-body internationals, cargo freighters, carrying goods around the globe. It was a complex ballet of schedules and safety procedures that she was only beginning to appreciate. "The truth is," Rodriguez continued, "the airline industry is changing. We're seeing more complex aircraft systems, more challenging weather patterns, and increasing air traffic congestion. We need pilots who can think beyond the checklist, who can handle situations that aren't covered in the flight operations manual. Your background gives you exactly that kind of adaptability." The offer was compelling, not just financially though. TransCon's package was competitive, but in terms of responsibility and opportunity. They were offering her a direct entry into their captain upgrade program, fast-tracking her to airline transport pilot certification, with the goal of making her a line captain within 18 months. "There's something else," Rodriguez added, pulling out a thick folder from her desk. "We're launching a new safety initiative, a program to train our pilots in advanced crew resource management and emergency decision-making. We want you to help develop and lead that program. Your experience, both military and from Flight 447, makes you uniquely qualified." Samantha opened the folder and found herself looking at preliminary curriculum outlines, budget projections, and letters of endorsement from other major airlines. It was clear that TransCon had been planning this program long before Flight 447, but her involvement would give it credibility and practical relevance. "This is about more than just flying," she realized, looking up at Rodriguez. "You're talking about changing how pilots are trained industry-wide." "Exactly. The old model of rote memorization and checklist compliance isn't enough anymore. We need pilots who can think critically under pressure, who can adapt to novel situations, who can lead effectively in a crisis. The kind of pilot you proved yourself to be 3 weeks ago." As Samantha considered the proposal, her phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Morrison. The message was simple but carried weight. "Any decision yet?" Sarah Kim got her captain's slot at United, told them she learned more in 30 minutes with you than in 2 years of line flying. Think about it. The text reminded Samantha of something she'd been trying to ignore, the impact her actions had on the other people involved. First Officer Kim had indeed parlayed her experience on Flight 447 into a rapid promotion, and she'd been vocal about crediting Samantha's mentorship during the emergency. Other crew members had similar stories of how that day had changed their approach to flying. "Can I ask you something, Captain Rodriguez?" Samantha said, closing the folder. "Why is this personal for you? I mean, why are you personally involved in recruiting me?" Rodriguez's expression grew serious. "Because 15 years ago, I was the first officer on a flight that didn't end as well as yours did. Engine failure on departure from Phoenix, lost all hydraulics, and we didn't have anyone with your skill set to help us through it. We made it down, but barely, and 3 passengers were seriously injured in the emergency landing. I've spent every day since then wondering if someone with your background could have made the difference." The scandal broke on a Thursday morning, exactly 8 months after TransCon 892's emergency landing, and it threatened to destroy everything Samantha had worked to build. She was in her office reviewing curriculum for the Advanced Crew Resource Management program when Captain Rodriguez burst through the door, her face pale with anger and concern. "Captain Walsh, we have a problem," Rodriguez said, dropping a tablet on Samantha's desk. The screen displayed the website of Aviation Weekly, with a headline that made Samantha's blood run cold. "Hero pilot or publicity stunt?" Questions raised. About TransCon's emergency response program. Samantha read the article with growing disbelief. An anonymous source within the airline industry was claiming that TransCon had deliberately staged emergencies to generate positive publicity for their safety program. The article specifically questioned the circumstances of Flight 447's emergency landing and suggested that Samantha's involvement had been pre-planned as a marketing stunt. "This is insane," Samantha said, looking up at Rodriguez. "You know as well as I do that I was just a passenger on 447. I had no connection to TransCon at the time." "I know that, and you know that, but the damage is already spreading," Rodriguez replied grimly. "The story has been picked up by 3 major news networks, and social media is going crazy with conspiracy theories. There are people claiming that commercial aviation safety improvements are just elaborate publicity schemes. The implications were staggering. If the public lost faith in airline safety initiatives, it could undermine decades of progress in aviation safety culture. Worse, it could discourage pilots from seeking help during genuine emergencies for fear of being accused of participating in publicity stunts." Samantha's phone buzzed with the first of what would become dozens of calls from reporters seeking comment on the allegations. She ignored them all, but the messages kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last and demanding a response to the serious questions being raised about her conduct. "Ma'am, who would do this?" Samantha asked Rodriguez. "Who benefits from undermining aviation safety programs?" "That's what we need to find out," Rodriguez replied. "But right now, we have more immediate problems. The FAA is launching an investigation into our emergency response program, and 3 other airlines have suspended their participation in the consortium we've been building." The next few hours brought a cascade of bad news. Captain Morrison called to report that he was being questioned by investigators about his role in recruiting Samantha to TransCon. First Officer Kim, now a captain with United Airlines, was facing similar scrutiny about her rapid promotion following Flight 447. Most devastating was a call from Dr. Hendricks at Mountain Medical Air Transport. "Captain Walsh, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but our board of directors has decided to suspend your consulting arrangement pending resolution of these allegations. They're concerned about liability issues if there are questions about your judgment or integrity." Each development felt like a body blow to Samantha, who had devoted the past 8 months to building something she believed could save lives. The irony was bitter. Programs designed to improve aviation safety were being destroyed by unfounded accusations that had nothing to do with their actual effectiveness. The worst part was the impact on the pilots and crews who had benefited from the training programs. Amy Chun called that afternoon, her voice shaky with emotion. "Captain Walsh, I don't know what to believe anymore," Amy said. "The investigators are asking me whether I think my experience on TransCon 892 was somehow staged. They're making me doubt my own memories of what happened." "Amy, listen to me carefully," Samantha replied. "What happened on 892 was real. Your fear was real, your professionalism was real, and the danger we faced was absolutely real. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." But even as Samantha reassured Amy, she could feel doubt creeping into her own mind. Not about the reality of the emergencies, she knew those had been genuine, but about whether her decision to enter commercial aviation had been wise. Perhaps she should have taken the defense contractor job and avoided the public spotlight. Entirely, the investigation intensified over the following days, with federal agents interviewing passengers from Flight 447 and crew members from TransCon 892. The interviews were professional but thorough, covering every detail of the emergencies. And Samantha's responses. Several passengers reported being asked whether they had noticed anything unusual about Samantha's behavior before the emergency began. Captain Stevens, the pilot of TransCon 892, was particularly affected by the investigation. During a phone call with Samantha, his voice carried a bitterness that was painful to hear. "Captain Walsh, they're asking me whether I was instructed to declare an emergency," Stevens said. "They want to know if TransCon offered me incentives to participate in what they're calling a manufactured crisis. It's like they're calling me a liar and a fraud." "Captain Stevens, I'm sorry you're going through this," Samantha replied, "but you and I both know what happened up there. We were dealing with genuine system failures that could have killed everyone on board if we hadn't handled them properly." "I know that, but the investigators are good at their job," Stevens replied. "They keep asking questions that make you second-guess everything you remember. Did the emergency really develop as quickly as I thought? Were the system failures as severe as they seemed? After a while, you start wondering if your own memory can be trusted." The psychological warfare aspect of the investigation was perhaps the most insidious element. By questioning the basic facts of the emergencies, the investigators were undermining the confidence and credibility of everyone involved. Even pilots who had performed heroically under pressure were beginning to doubt themselves. Samantha found herself isolated as the aviation community waited to see how the investigation would resolve. Colleagues who had previously sought her advice now avoided contact, unwilling to risk being associated with the growing scandal. Speaking engagements were canceled, consulting contracts were suspended, and the safety program that had been her primary focus was placed on indefinite hold. The low point came during a meeting with TransCon's legal team, where Samantha learned the full extent of the allegations being made by the anonymous source. According to the whist hash she was napping in 12B, the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Master Sergeant Robert Boole Kowalski, the retired Air Force veteran who had been a passenger on Flight 447, contacted Samantha directly through her military email address, which had somehow remained private despite the media frenzy. "Captain Walsh, I think you need to see this," Kowalski said during their phone call. "I've been doing some digging into this whole mess, and I found something interesting about your anonymous accuser." Kowalski had used his military contacts and investigative experience to trace the source of the allegations. What he'd discovered was a web of corporate espionage and competitive sabotage that had nothing to do with aviation safety and everything to do with business rivalry. The anonymous source works for Pinnacle Defense Systems, Kowalski explained. That's the same defense contractor you turned down to join TransCon. Apparently, they lost a major contract to develop pilot training simulators after the military. Heard about TransCon's safety program? Someone there decided to eliminate the competition by destroying your reputation. The revelation hit Samantha like a physical blow. Her former potential employer, the company she'd almost joined, instead of TransCon, had orchestrated the entire scandal to undermine her work in commercial aviation. The irony was devastating. By choosing to help save lives in the airline industry, she'd inadvertently created an enemy in the defense sector. Sergeant Kowalski, how did you figure this out? Samantha asked, though she was almost afraid to hope the information was accurate. 20 years of military intelligence training doesn't just disappear when you retire, Kowalski replied with a dry chuckle. Plus, I had help from some of the other passengers from 447. We've stayed in touch, and several of us were military or law enforcement. When we saw what was happening to you, we decided to do our own investigation. The passenger network that had formed after Flight 447 had become an informal support group, bonded by their shared experience of survival. When they saw Samantha being attacked in the media, they'd quietly mobilized their collective skills to uncover the truth. It was a testament to the loyalty she'd earned through her actions during the emergency. Armed with Kowalski's evidence, Samantha and TransCon's legal team were able to trace the paper trail back to Pinnacle Defense Systems. What they found was a systematic campaign of misinformation, involving planted stories, manufactured witnesses, and carefully orchestrated leaks designed to destroy confidence in commercial aviation safety programs. The evidence was overwhelming. But the damage had already been done. The FAA investigation had cast doubt on legitimate safety initiatives. Other airlines had withdrawn from collaborative programs, and pilots across the industry were second-guessing their emergency procedures for fear of being accused of publicity seeking. We can clear your name, Rodriguez told Samantha during an emergency meeting. But rebuilding what we've lost is going to take years, maybe decades. Pinnacle succeeded in setting back aviation safety by at least a generation. The revelation of Pinnacle's involvement brought new players into the investigation. The FBI's Corporate Crimes Division launched a criminal probe, while the Department of Defense began reviewing Pinnacle's government contracts. If a defense contractor was willing to undermine civilian aviation safety for competitive advantage, questions arose about their reliability in military applications. Dr. Hendricks called to apologize and offer reinstatement of Samantha's consulting position, but the damage to mountain medical air transport had been severe. Several pilots had resigned rather than face continued scrutiny, and their emergency response capability had been compromised at the worst possible time during peak ski season in the Colorado mountains. Captain Walsh, I owe you more than an apology, Hendricks said during their call. I should have trusted my instincts about your character instead of bowing to legal pressure. Because I didn't stand by you, we lost some of our best pilots, and people in the mountains are going to suffer for it. The vindication of Samantha and the exposure of Pinnacle's campaign marked the beginning of a long journey toward rebuilding trust in aviation safety programs. The FBI's investigation revealed the full scope of the corporate sabotage, leading to criminal charges against 3 Pinnacle executives and a massive civil lawsuit from TransCon and other affected airlines. But clearing Samantha's name was only the first step in a complex process of restoring confidence in the safety initiative she'd worked to develop. The aviation industry, scarred by months of doubt and suspicion, was reluctant to embrace programs that had been tainted by the scandal. Even after their vindication, Captain Morrison proved to be a crucial ally in the rebuilding effort. His reputation in the industry was unassailable, and his vocal support for Samantha carried weight with skeptical airline executives. During a speech at the National Aviation Safety Symposium, he delivered what many considered the defining statement of the controversy. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been flying for over 20 years, and I can tell you without hesitation that Captain Samantha Walsh saved my life and the lives of 146 other people," Morrison declared to the packed auditorium. "The fact that we allowed corporate greed to undermine our commitment to safety should shame us all. We cannot let the actions of a few bad actors destroy programs that save lives." The speech, widely covered in aviation media, marked a turning point in industry sentiment. Other veteran pilots began speaking out in support of evidence-based safety programs, sharing their own experiences with emergencies and the value of advanced training techniques. First Officer Kim, now Captain Kim, organized a group of pilots who had benefited from Samantha's training programs. They called themselves the 447 Squadron, in honor of the flight that had started it all, and they became advocates for restoring and expanding safety initiatives across the industry. "Captain Walsh didn't just teach us how to handle emergencies," Kim explained during a television interview. "She taught us how to think like test pilots, how to adapt to situations that aren't in any manual. That kind of training doesn't just save lives, it changes how you approach every aspect of flying." The grassroots support from working pilots gradually overcame the institutional resistance that had followed the scandal. Airlines began quietly reinstating their participation in safety consortiums, and the FAA issued new guidelines encouraging the kind of innovative training approaches that Samantha had pioneered. Amy Chun's story became particularly powerful in rebuilding public confidence. Her transformation from a terrified flight attendant to a confident crew member exemplified the human impact of effective safety training. During congressional hearings on aviation safety, she testified about how Samantha's mentorship had changed her entire approach to her profession. "Before that flight, I was just following procedures," Amy told the committee. "Captain Walsh taught me to understand why those procedures exist and how to adapt when they're not enough. Every flight attendant in America should have access to that kind of training." 18 months after the scandal broke, Samantha found herself standing on the flight deck of TransCon 1205, preparing for departure from Seattle to London, her first international flight as a captain. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner represented the cutting edge of commercial aviation technology, and her presence in the left seat symbolized how far she'd come since that turbulent afternoon on Flight 447. First Officer Marcus Thompson, a former Air Force transport pilot, completed the pre-flight checklist with the kind of precision that Samantha had come to expect from pilots trained in the new safety protocols. The program she'd developed had been implemented across TransCon's entire fleet, and the results were measurable: a 40% reduction in serious incidents and a dramatic improvement in crew confidence during non-normal situations. "Captain Walsh, we're cleared for departure," Thompson reported, his professionalism evident in every aspect of his preparation. "Weather looks good all the way to London, and we've got favorable winds at altitude." As the 787 lifted off from Seattle's runway, Samantha reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scandal had been devastating, but it had also revealed the strength of the aviation community when united around common principles. The support she'd received from passengers, crew members, and fellow pilots had restored her faith in the profession she'd chosen. The new safety program, rebranded as the Advanced Crew Resource Management Initiative, was now being adopted by airlines worldwide. The curriculum had been refined and expanded based on lessons learned during the controversy, incorporating not just technical skills, but also training in media relations and crisis management for pilots who might find themselves in the public eye. Dr. Hendricks had not only reinstated Samantha's consulting position, but had asked her to lead a new joint venture between Mountain Medical Air Transport and TransCon, developing specialized training for pilots who flew in challenging mountain environments. The program combined her military test pilot experience with the harsh realities of medical emergency flights, creating a unique skill set that was already saving lives. During the flight to London, Samantha received a satellite phone call from Captain Rodriguez, who had news about the ongoing legal proceedings against Pinnacle Defense Systems. "The Department of Justice just announced a settlement," Rodriguez reported. "Pinnacle is paying $150 million in damages and has agreed to fund a new aviation safety research foundation. They're also being barred from any government contracts for the next 5 years." The financial settlement was significant, but more important was the symbolic victory it represented. The aviation industry had successfully defended itself against corporate sabotage and emerged stronger for the experience. The new research foundation would fund exactly the kind of innovative safety programs that Pinnacle had tried to destroy. As TransCon 1205 cruised over the North Atlantic at 41,000 feet, Samantha's thoughts turned to the future. The aviation industry was evolving rapidly, with new technologies and new challenges emerging constantly. Autonomous aircraft systems, electric propulsion, and space tourism were creating opportunities and risks that would require new approaches to pilot training and safety management. "First Officer Thompson, what's your background?" Samantha asked during a quiet moment in the flight. 10 years flying C-130s for the Air Force, ma'am," Thompson replied. "Heavy airlift operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. I joined TransCon because I heard about your training programs and wanted to be part of something innovative." It was a response Samantha heard often from new hires pilots, seeking not just employment, but the chance to be part of advancing the profession. The scandal had inadvertently created a recruitment advantage for TransCon, as pilots with strong backgrounds sought to join an airline committed to excellence and continuous improvement. 2 years later, Samantha stood before an audience of 500 aviation professionals at the International Aviation Safety Conference in Montreal, delivering the keynote address that would cap her remarkable journey from military pilot to industry leader. The auditorium was packed with pilots, engineers, regulators, and safety experts from around the world, all eager to hear from the woman who had become synonymous with crisis leadership and innovative training. 3 years ago, I was just a passenger on a commercial flight," Samantha began, her voice carrying easily through the large auditorium. "I never intended to become an airline pilot, and I certainly never planned to become an advocate for industry-wide safety reform. But sometimes the path we're meant to follow chooses us, rather than the other way around." The audience included many familiar faces. Captain Morrison and First Officer Kim sat in the front row, along with Amy Chun and Dr. Hendricks, Master Sergeant. Kowalski had flown in from Denver, wearing his dress military uniform for the occasion. Even some passengers from Flight 447 had traveled to Montreal to hear Samantha speak. "The past 3 years have taught me that aviation safety isn't just about following procedures or maintaining equipment," Samantha continued. "It's about building a culture where every person in the system, from pilots to flight attendants to mechanics to air traffic controllers, feels empowered to speak up when they see something wrong, and confident in their ability to handle situations that no one has planned for." The speech traced the evolution of her thinking from the early days after Flight 447, through the scandal and vindication, to the current state of industry-wide reform. She spoke about the importance of learning from failure, the dangers of complacency, and the need for continuous innovation in safety practices. "We learned that our industry is only as strong as our commitment to truth and transparency," Samantha said, addressing the Pinnacle scandal directly. "When corporate interests try to undermine safety for competitive advantage, we all have a responsibility to stand up and defend the principles that keep the flying public safe." The audience responded with sustained applause, recognizing not just her technical expertise, but her moral courage in facing down a well-funded corporate attack. The vindication of her work had become a rallying point for the entire industry, demonstrating that ethical principles could prevail over economic pressure. During the question and answer session, a young pilot from a regional airline asked about the future of pilot training. Captain Walsh, with increasing automation and artificial intelligence in aircraft systems, what skills will human pilots need in the coming decades? That's the right question to be asking, Samantha replied thoughtfully. As aircraft become more automated, the human pilot's role is shifting from manual control to systems management and decision-making under uncertainty. We need pilots who can think critically, who can diagnose novel problems, and who can lead effectively when technology fails. The same skills that helped us through Flight 447 and TransCon 892 will be even more important in the future. The conference marked the official launch of the Global Aviation Safety Initiative, a multinational program funded in part by the Pinnacle Settlement and designed to share best practices across the industry. Samantha had been chosen to lead the initiative, a role that would take her around the world working with airlines, regulators, and training organizations. After the conference, as delegates mingled during the reception, Samantha found herself in conversation with Captain Elena Volkov, a former Russian Air Force pilot who had recently joined Aeroflot's international division. "Captain Walsh, I wanted to thank you for what you've done for our profession," Volkov said in excellent English. "In Russia, we are implementing many of your training concepts, and we are seeing the same improvements in safety culture that you have achieved in America." Similar conversations took place throughout the evening, with pilots and safety professionals from every continent sharing stories of how the new training approaches were making a difference in their operations. The ripple effects of that afternoon on Flight 447 were now being felt in cockpits around the world. As the evening wound down, Samantha stepped out onto the hotel balcony overlooking the lights of Montreal. The city stretched out below her, its aircraft warning lights blinking on towers and buildings, a reminder of the constant dance between aviation and the communities it served. Captain Morrison joined her on the balcony, carrying 2 glasses of wine from the reception. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, offering her a glass. "I was just thinking about all the flights happening right now," Samantha replied, accepting the wine. Thousands of aircraft in the air at this moment, carrying millions of passengers safely to their destinations. Most of them will never know the names of their pilots or think about the training and preparation that makes their journey possible. "That's as it should be," Morrison observed. "The best aviation safety is invisible to the passengers. They should be able to focus on their meetings or their vacations or their family reunions, trusting that we've done our job properly." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching aircraft approach and depart from Montreal's Pierre Elliott Trudeau International Airport. Each set of lights represented dozens or hundreds of lives being transported safely through the sky. A routine miracle that happened thousands of times every day around the world. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been on Flight 447 that day? Morrison asked. Samantha considered the question carefully. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "You and Sarah would have found a way to get the plane down safely. You're both skilled pilots. But I'm glad I was there, because everything that followed has been worth it. The programs we've built, the lives we've saved, the culture change we've inspired, it all started with that emergency." "And where do you go from here?" Morrison asked. "The Global Aviation Safety Initiative is a big job, but knowing you're already thinking about what comes next." Samantha smiled, recognizing how well Morrison had come to know her over the past 3 years. "Actually, I've been talking to NASA about their commercial crew program," she said. "They're looking for experienced pilots to help train the next generation of space transportation crews. Apparently, my background in both military test flying and commercial crisis management makes me a good fit." Morrison raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Space? That's quite a leap from airline flying." "Not as big a leap as you might think," Samantha replied. "The principles are the same: understanding complex systems, managing risk, leading teams under pressure. Plus, if we're serious about the future of transportation, space is where the next frontier lies. Commercial space tourism, orbital manufacturing, lunar transportation, it's all going to need the same kind of safety culture we've been building in aviation. The conversation was interrupted by Amy Chun, who approached with a tablet displaying the evening's news coverage of the safety conference. "Captain Walsh, you need to see this," Amy said, her excitement evident. "The story about your speech has been picked up by news outlets around the world, and the response on social media has been incredible." The tablet showed dozens of news articles and social media posts from pilots, passengers, and aviation professionals sharing their own stories of how the safety programs had impacted their work or their travel experiences. The hashtag flight safety was trending globally, with thousands of posts celebrating the progress made in aviation safety culture. "Look at this one," Amy said, scrolling to a video post from a young flight attendant in South Korea. The woman was speaking in Korean with English subtitles, explaining how the new crew resource management training had helped her crew handle a medical emergency during a flight from Seoul to Singapore. "And this one," Amy continued, showing a post from a pilot in Brazil who had successfully managed a bird strike using techniques learned from the new training protocols. Similar stories were appearing from every corner of the aviation world, demonstrating the global impact of the safety initiatives. "I think you've started something that's bigger than any of us realized," Morrison observed, watching the stream of posts continue to appear on the tablet dot as they prepared to return to the reception. Samantha's phone buzzed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. The message was simple but powerful. "Captain Walsh, my name is Jennifer Lopez, and I was a passenger on Flight 447. I just wanted you to know that my daughter started flight training last month because she was inspired by your story. Thank you for showing her that being a pilot means being a protector." The message reminded Samantha that the impact of that afternoon on Flight 447 extended far beyond the aviation industry. Young people around the world were choosing careers in aviation because they had seen that flying could be about more than transportation. It could be about service, leadership, and the preservation of human life. Captain Samantha Walsh stood in the viewing gallery of the Kennedy Space Center, watching as the commercial spacecraft Endeavour II prepared for launch with 6 passengers aboard, the first fully commercial orbital flight, operated under the safety protocols she had helped develop for the commercial crew program. The spacecraft represented the culmination of everything she had learned about crisis management, crew training, and the intersection of technology and human judgment. Beside her stood many of the people who had been part of her journey. Captain Morrison, now retired, but serving as an advisor to the Global Aviation Safety Initiative. Amy Chun, who had completed her pilot training and was now flying as a first officer for TransCon. And Dr. Hendricks, whose mountain medical transport service had become a model for emergency aviation operations worldwide. "To minus 60 seconds and counting," the launch controller announced over the facility's public address system. "All systems remain green for launch." The passenger manifest for today's flight included one particularly significant name: Sarah Kim, the former first officer from Flight 447 who had become TransCon's youngest female captain and was now transitioning to commercial space transportation. Her presence on the flight represented the evolution of the safety culture that had begun with an emergency landing in Denver 5 years earlier. "I still can't believe Sarah talked her way onto that flight," Morrison said, shaking his head with a mixture of admiration and concern. "She said she wanted to be part of the first generation of commercial space pilots, but I think she also wanted to prove that the training protocols work in space as well as on Earth." "She'd be fine," Samantha replied confidently. The crew training for commercial space operations is based on the same principles we developed for aviation understanding systems: managing risk and working as a team under pressure. If anything, The space environment is less complex than what we deal with in commercial aviation. T-10 seconds. 9.8.7. The countdown continued as the gathered crowd fell silent, watching as humanity took another step toward making space travel as routine and safe as commercial aviation. The rocket engines ignited with a brilliant flash of light, and the spacecraft began its ascent toward orbit, carrying its precious cargo of human lives toward the stars. As the spacecraft disappeared into the blue Florida sky, leaving only a contrail and the memory of its thunder, Samantha reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. What had begun as an unexpected emergency on a routine commercial flight had evolved into a career dedicated to pushing the boundaries of human transportation safety. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Global Aviation Safety Initiative headquarters, informing her that the latest industry statistics showed another significant decrease in aviation incidents worldwide. The safety culture changes that had seemed so challenging to implement were now bearing fruit in measurable improvements to flight safety. But perhaps more important than the statistics were the personal stories that continued to arrive from around the world. Pilots who had successfully handled emergencies using the training techniques she had developed. Passengers whose lives had been saved by crews who understood their responsibilities beyond mere procedure compliance. And young people who had been inspired to enter aviation careers by the example of professionalism and dedication they had witnessed. "Captain Walsh," Dr. Hendricks said, approaching with a tablet displaying the latest news coverage of the space launch. "There's someone here who wants to meet you." Following Dr. Hendricks was a young woman in her early 20s, wearing the uniform of a student pilot. Her name tag read J. Lopez, Flight Training Academy, and Samantha immediately recognized the surname from the text message she had received years earlier. "Captain Walsh, I'm Jennifer Lopez," the young woman said, extending her hand with a confident smile. "My mother was a passenger on Flight 447, and she sent you a message about me starting flight training. I wanted to thank you in person for inspiring me to become a pilot." The meeting brought the story full circle, demonstrating how the ripple effects of that emergency landing continued to spread through new generations of aviation professionals. Jennifer's presence at the space launch was no coincidence. She was completing her commercial pilot training and had already been accepted into TransCon's pilot development program. "Ms. Lopez, I'm honored to meet you," Samantha replied, shaking the young woman's hand. "But you should know that you've inspired me as well. Seeing young people like you enter aviation tells me that we've succeeded in building something lasting and meaningful." As the crowd began to disperse from the viewing gallery, making their way back to their hotels and airports for return flights around the world, Samantha lingered for a few more minutes, watching the contrail of the spacecraft gradually fade into the afternoon sky. Her satellite phone rang with an incoming call from NASA Mission Control, where she was scheduled to provide consultation on the spacecraft systems during its orbital operations. The commercial space industry was still in its infancy, but the same principles of safety culture and crisis management that had revolutionized aviation were already being applied to humanity's next frontier. "This is Captain Walsh," she answered, walking toward the parking area where her rental car waited to take her to Mission Control. "Captain, this is Flight Director Stevens at Mission Control. I wanted to update you on the Endeavour I status. All systems are nominal, and the crew is performing beautifully. Captain Kim sends her regards and says to tell you that the training protocols are working perfectly in zero gravity." The call reminded Samantha that her work was far from over. As humanity expanded into space, new challenges would emerge that would require the same kind of innovative thinking and dedication to safety that had characterized her journey from military pilot to industry leader. There would be new emergencies to handle, new training protocols to develop, and new generations of pilots to inspire. But for now, as she drove through the Florida afternoon toward another day of service in the endless quest to keep human beings Safe in their travels through the sky and beyond, Captain Samantha Walsh allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. What had begun with a nap in seat 12B had become a legacy of safety, professionalism, and hope that would continue to protect lives for generations to come. 10 years after Flight 447, Captain Samantha Walsh received a call that would change everything once again. She was in her office at the International Space Safety Consortium in Houston, reviewing protocols for the upcoming Mars mission crew training, when her secure line rang with a priority code she hadn't seen in years. "Captain Walsh, this is Admiral Rebecca Chun, Chief of Naval Operations," the voice on the other end said. "I need you back." Samantha's heart skipped. Admiral Chun was Amy Chun's older sister, the same Amy who had been a flight attendant on TransCon 892 and was now a senior captain with the airline. The connection felt surreal, a reminder of how intertwined her life had become with the people she'd met during those critical emergencies. "Admiral, with respect, I've been out of the Navy for over a decade," Samantha replied. "What could you possibly need me for?" "Project Skybridge," Admiral Chun said simply. "We're developing autonomous naval aircraft for carrier operations, and the AI systems are problematic. We've had 3 test flights where the automation failed catastrophically. We need someone who understands both military aviation and crisis management in complex systems. Your work with commercial space safety makes you uniquely qualified." The conversation lasted an hour, during which Admiral Chun outlined a crisis that was threatening to set back naval aviation by decades. The new autonomous fighters were supposed to represent the future of carrier operations, but multiple system failures during test flights had killed 2 test pilots and destroyed 4 aircraft worth $200 million each. "The problem isn't the technology," Admiral Chun explained. "It's the interface between human judgment and artificial intelligence. The AI systems are making decisions that seem logical but ignore critical factors that only experienced pilots understand. We need someone who can bridge that gap." Samantha stared out her office window at the sprawling Johnson Space Center, where the next generation of astronauts was training for missions to the Moon and Mars. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being asked to return to her military roots, just as she was preparing humanity for its greatest adventure in space. "Admiral, I'll need to think about this," Samantha said. "I have commitments here, and the Mars mission crew training is at a critical phase. Captain Walsh, I understand your position, but we're facing a congressional hearing in 6 weeks. If we can't demonstrate that these systems are safe and effective, the entire program gets canceled. 20 years of development and $50 billion in investment, gone. More importantly, we'll be surrendering technological leadership to our adversaries." After the call ended, Samantha sat in her office as the afternoon shadows lengthened across Houston. Her life had taken so many unexpected turns since that day she'd fallen asleep in seat 12B, and now she was facing another crossroads that could reshape her future once again. Her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Morrison, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, heard through the grapevine about Chun's call. "Whatever you decide, you have my support. But remember, you've always been at your best when the stakes are highest." 3 weeks later, Samantha found herself walking across the tarmac at Naval Air Station Patuxent River, the same test pilot school where her military career had truly begun. The familiar sights and sounds, the whine of jet engines, the smell of aviation fuel, the purposeful movement of ground crews, brought back memories she'd thought were buried beneath years of civilian flying. Commander Jake "Viper" Harrison met her at the flight line, his weathered face breaking into a grin as he recognized her approach. Harrison had been a test pilot instructor when Samantha was a student, and seeing him again felt like stepping back in time. "Captain Walsh, or should I say Dr. Walsh now?" Harrison said, referencing the honorary doctorate in aviation safety. she'd received from MIT the previous year. "Welcome back to Pax River, though I have to say, I never expected to see you in civilian clothes on this base." "It feels strange to be back, Commander," Samantha admitted, looking around at the facilities that had shaped her early career. "But when the Navy calls with a problem this complex, it's hard to say no." Harrison led her to Hangar 7, where the troubled X-47C autonomous fighter sat under bright fluorescent lights, surrounded by technicians and engineers. The aircraft was sleek and predatory, its angular surfaces designed to minimize radar signature while maximizing performance. But despite its impressive appearance, the X-47C had become known as a widowmaker among the test pilot community. "The artificial intelligence system is incredibly sophisticated," Harrison explained as they walked around the aircraft. "It can process sensor data faster than any human pilot, calculate optimal flight paths in real time, and execute maneuvers that would be impossible for human pilots. But it keeps making decisions that get people killed." Dr. Michael Stevens, the chief engineer for the X-47C program, joined them at the aircraft. Stevens was brilliant but frustrated, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks after months of failures and mounting pressure from Pentagon leadership. "Captain Walsh, I've read your work on human-AI interaction in complex systems," Stevens said, shaking her hand. "The problem we're facing is that the AI makes perfect decisions based on incomplete information. It can't account for variables that human pilots instinctively understand, weather patterns that aren't showing up on sensors, mechanical vibrations that indicate impending failure, or tactical situations that require creative solutions." Samantha walked around the aircraft, her trained eye taking in every detail. The X-47C represented the pinnacle of aviation technology, but she could already see potential problems in its design. The AI system was trying to replace human judgment rather than augment it, a fundamental flaw that had led to similar problems in commercial aviation before better integration protocols were developed. "Have you tried implementing collaborative decision-making protocols?" Samantha asked. "Instead of having the AI make autonomous decisions, what if it presented options to a human operator who could choose the best course of action?" "We considered that," Stevens replied, "but the whole point of the program is to reduce human involvement in dangerous operations. The Navy wants unmanned fighters that can operate in contested airspace where human pilots would be at risk." "But that's exactly the problem," Samantha said, her mind already working through potential solutions. "You're trying to eliminate the human element entirely, when what you should be doing is leveraging human intuition and AI processing power. Together, the AI should handle data processing and option generation, while humans handle strategic decision-making and creative problem-solving." 2 months of intensive work led to a revolutionary new approach to human-AI collaboration in military aviation. Instead of replacing pilots with artificial intelligence, Samantha's team developed a system where experienced pilots could supervise multiple autonomous aircraft simultaneously, providing strategic guidance while the AI handled tactical execution. Breakthrough came when they realized that the problem wasn't with the artificial intelligence itself, but with how it was being integrated into military operations. The AI was trying to make decisions that required human judgment, while humans were trying to process information faster than humanly possible. By clearly delineating responsibilities, they created a system that leveraged the strengths of both. Today's test flight will demonstrate the new collaborative control system, Admiral Chun announced to the assembled review board, which included senior Pentagon officials, congressional representatives, and international observers. Captain Walsh will supervise 3 X-47C aircraft simultaneously from the carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, while the AI systems handle individual aircraft control. Samantha stood on the flight deck of the massive aircraft carrier, watching as 3 X-47C fighters prepared for launch. Each aircraft was worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, and their success or failure would determine the future of naval aviation. The pressure was immense, but she felt the same calm focus that had served her during the emergency landings years earlier. "Skybridge Control, this is Captain Walsh," she said into her headset, speaking to the carrier's command center. "All aircraft show green status. Beginning launch sequence." The first X-47C catapulted off the carrier deck with the violent acceleration that defined carrier operations. The AI system handled the launch perfectly, automatically adjusting for wind conditions and maintaining optimal flight parameters. Within minutes, all 3 aircraft were airborne and forming up for the demonstration. "Skybridge 1 through 3, this is Control," Samantha commanded. "Execute tactical scenario Alpha 7. Multiple hostile aircraft approaching from bearing 270, Angels 20. The AI systems immediately began processing the simulated threat, calculating intercept courses and weapon deployment options. But instead of automatically executing an attack, the systems presented their analysis to Samantha for approval. "Control, Skybridge formation recommends split attack pattern." The AI reported through synthesized speech. "Skybridge 1 and 2 engage primary targets. Skybridge 3 provides overwatch and electronic warfare support." "Approved," Samantha replied. "Execute recommended pattern." The 3 aircraft moved with precision that would have been impossible for human pilots alone. Their maneuvers coordinated to the split second, while maintaining tactical formations that maximized their effectiveness. But the strategic decisions when to engage, how to respond to changing threats, whether to pursue or withdraw remained under human control. For 30 minutes, the demonstration continued through increasingly complex scenarios. The AI systems handled everything from mechanical failures to electronic jamming, but always within the framework of human strategic guidance. The result was a level of operational effectiveness that neither humans nor AI could achieve alone. Outstanding performance. Admiral Chun radioed from the carrier's command center. All objectives completed successfully. Skybridge formation, return to ship. The landing sequence was perhaps the most impressive part of the demonstration. The AI systems calculated approach speeds and angles with mathematical precision, while Samantha provided real-time adjustments for changing wind conditions and deck movement. All 3 aircraft trapped successfully, their arrest hook cables bringing them to controlled stops on the carrier deck. "Captain Walsh, in your professional opinion, does the Skybridge system represent a revolution in military aviation, or simply an expensive enhancement to existing capabilities?" The question came from Congressman Robert Martinez, chairman of the COSU, House Armed Services Committee. During Samantha's testimony before Congress, the hearing room was packed with defense contractors, military officials, and journalists, all eager to hear whether the $50 billion autonomous fighter program would continue or be canceled. Congressman Martinez: "I believe the Skybridge system represents a fundamental shift in how we think about human-machine collaboration," Samantha replied, her voice carrying the confidence earned through decades of crisis management. "We're not replacing human judgment with artificial intelligence. We're amplifying human capabilities with AI processing power." But critics argue that this system is unnecessarily complex. Pressed Congresswoman Sarah Kim, the same Sarah Kim who had been first officer on Flight 447, now serving her second term representing Washington State. "Wouldn't it be simpler and more cost-effective to either go fully autonomous or stick with traditional piloted aircraft?" Samantha smiled slightly, recognizing the sharp questioning technique that had made Kim an effective pilot and now an effective legislator. Congresswoman Kim, complexity isn't always the enemy of effectiveness. "When I was flying FA-18 Super Hornets, the aircraft systems were incredibly complex, but that complexity enabled capabilities that simpler aircraft couldn't match." The Skybridge system uses complexity to enhance safety and effectiveness, not to create unnecessary complications. The testimony continued for 3 hours, covering everything from cost overruns to international implications of autonomous military aircraft. Samantha fielded questions about ethics, safety protocols, and the potential for AI systems to make decisions without human oversight. Captain Walsh asked Senator Elizabeth Torres, "What safeguards exist to prevent these AI systems from operating outside human control?" "Senator, the system architecture includes multiple redundant human oversight mechanisms," Samantha explained. "No weapon can be deployed without explicit human authorization. No aircraft can engage targets without human confirmation. And human operators can override any AI decision at any time. The artificial intelligence provides information and recommendations, but humans retain ultimate authority over all critical decisions." The hearing's most dramatic moment came when Congressman David Park, a vocal critic of military spending, challenged the entire premise of the program. "Captain Walsh, you've built a career on crisis management and emergency response," Park said, his tone aggressive. "Isn't this entire program just an expensive solution to a problem that doesn't exist? Our current fighter aircraft are already the most capable in the world." Samantha paused, considering her response carefully. The question went to the heart of military aviation's future and the role of technology in national defense. "Congressman Park, 20 years ago, commercial aviation faced a similar choice," she replied. "Airlines could have continued using existing technology and procedures, accepting current levels of safety and efficiency. Instead, the industry invested in new approaches to training, new safety protocols, and new technologies. The result was a dramatic improvement in aviation safety that has saved thousands of lives." She gestured toward the viewing gallery, where Admiral Chen and other military officials were watching the proceedings. "The Skybridge system isn't about replacing what works, it's about preparing for challenges that haven't emerged yet. Future conflicts will involve threats that current aircraft and pilots can't handle alone. By developing human-AI collaboration now, we're ensuring that American forces will be ready for whatever challenges the next decade brings." 6 months after the successful congressional testimony, Samantha was back at the International Space Safety Consortium when the call came that would test the Skybridge system in ways no one had anticipated. She was reviewing protocols for the Mars mission when Admiral Chun's voice crackled through her secure satellite phone. "Captain Walsh, we have a situation in the South China Sea," Admiral Chun said, her voice tight with stress. "A civilian airliner has been hijacked and is being used as a human shield by hostile forces. We need this Skybridge system operational immediately." Samantha's blood ran cold. The scenario was every military planner's nightmare: a civilian aircraft being used to protect military assets, creating a situation where traditional rules of engagement were inadequate. "Admiral, what's the current status?" Samantha asked, already reaching for her emergency travel bag that she'd kept packed since returning to civilian life. Transglobal Flight 923 from Hong Kong to San Francisco was hijacked 4 hours ago. Admiral Chun explained. 280 passengers aboard, including 47 American citizens. The hijackers have diverted the aircraft to a military base controlled by hostile forces, and they're using the airliner to shield strategic assets from our surveillance and potential strikes. The irony was devastating: another commercial airliner in crisis, but this time the danger came from human hostility rather than mechanical failure. Samantha's expertise in aviation emergencies was about to be tested in a military context that blurred the lines between rescue and warfare. "I'll be wheels up in 2 hours, Samantha said, her mind already shifting into crisis management mode. "Have the Skybridge systems been deployed to the area?" USS Gerald R. Ford is en route, with 3 X-47C aircraft aboard, Admiral Chun replied. But this situation is exactly what we designed the system to handle, a complex scenario, requiring precise intelligence gathering and potential rescue operations without risking additional American lives. The flight to the USS Gerald R. Ford gave Samantha time to study the evolving situation. Transglobal Flight 923 had been hijacked by a sophisticated terrorist organization that had infiltrated airport security in Hong Kong. The hijackers had forced the crew to fly to a remote military installation where they were holding the passengers as human shields while conducting what appeared to be a major arms transfer operation. Traditional military responses were limited by the presence of civilian hostages, while diplomatic solutions were complicated by the involvement of state actors who refused to acknowledge the situation publicly. It was exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered crisis that the Skybridge system had been designed to address. "Captain Walsh, welcome aboard," said Captain Robert Hayes, the commanding officer of the USS Gerald R. Ford, as Samantha arrived on the carrier's flight deck. "We've got intelligence assets gathering information, but we need real-time surveillance of the hijacked aircraft without alerting the hostiles to our presence." The X-47C aircraft offered capabilities that traditional reconnaissance platforms couldn't match: stealth characteristics that made them nearly invisible to radar, advanced sensors that could gather detailed intelligence from safe distances, and the ability to operate continuously without risking pilot fatigue or capture. "Captain Hayes, I need direct communication with the Skybridge aircraft and access to all available intelligence," Samantha said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death decision-making. "This isn't going to be a conventional military operation. We're going to need to think like rescue workers and aviators, not just warriors." The operation began at dawn, with 3 X-47C aircraft launching from the USS Gerald R. Ford under cover of darkness. Samantha supervised the mission from the carrier's advanced command center, surrounded by screens displaying real-time data from multiple sources: satellite imagery, electronic intercepts, and feeds from the Skybridge aircraft sensors. Skybridge 1. Establish high-altitude surveillance pattern around the target facility, Samantha commanded. "I need detailed imagery of the aircraft and surrounding structures." Skybridge 2 and 3. Maintain standoff positions and prepare for close-in reconnaissance. The AI systems aboard the X-47C aircraft immediately began processing massive amounts of sensor data, identifying structures, vehicles, and personnel around the hijacked airliner. But the real breakthrough came when the artificial intelligence detected something that human analysts had missed: a pattern of movement that suggested the hijackers were preparing to execute the hostages. "Control, Skybridge 1 detecting increased activity around the target aircraft," the AI reported. "Pattern analysis suggests hostile forces are preparing for rapid departure. Recommend immediate tactical assessment." Samantha studied the incoming data with growing alarm. The intelligence suggested that the hijackers were planning to abandon the passengers and escape using military aircraft stationed at the facility. If they succeeded, the civilian hostages would likely be executed to eliminate witnesses. "Admiral Chun, this is Captain Walsh," Samantha said, opening a secure channel to the Pentagon. "We have a time-critical situation developing. Recommend immediate authorization for rescue operations." "Captain Walsh, you're authorized to proceed with any actions necessary to protect American civilians," Admiral Chun replied without hesitation. "Rules of engagement are weapons-free for hostile forces, but protection of civilian lives takes absolute priority." The next phase of the operation required the kind of precision that only the human-AI collaboration could provide. The Skybridge aircraft needed to disable the hijackers' escape aircraft while avoiding any actions that could endanger the civilian hostages aboard the airliner. Skybridge 2. Target the military aircraft on the north side of the facility, Samantha ordered. Use precision strikes to disable engines and control surfaces. Skybridge 3. Position for electronic warfare against communication systems. I want the hostiles isolated and unable to coordinate. The AI systems calculated. Attack angles and weapon selections with mathematical precision. But Samantha retained control over target selection and rules of engagement. The artificial intelligence could process thousands of variables simultaneously, but human judgment remained essential for ethical decision-making and strategic thinking. The strikes were executed with surgical precision. The military aircraft were disabled without causing explosions that could damage the civilian airliner, while electronic jamming prevented the hijackers from communicating with external support networks. Within minutes, the tactical situation had shifted dramatically in favor of the rescue operation. Control. Skybridge formation reports successful target engagement, the AI announced. Hostile escape aircraft disabled, communication systems jammed. No detected damage to civilian aircraft. But the most challenging phase of the operation was still ahead, actually rescuing the hostages without triggering a violent response from the hijackers. This required the kind of creative problem-solving that no amount of artificial intelligence could provide. Skybridge 1. Begin psychological operations, Samantha commanded, implementing a strategy she'd developed based on her experience with aviation emergencies. Broadcast standard. Emergency frequencies informing the hijackers that their escape routes have been compromised and that cooperation will result in safe passage. The message was carefully crafted to offer the hijackers a face-saving way to surrender, while making it clear that resistance was futile. The AI systems provided real-time assessment of the hijackers' likely responses, based on behavioral analysis and communication intercepts. The rescue operation concluded 12 hours later when the hijackers, isolated and unable to escape, negotiated a surrender that allowed them safe passage in exchange for releasing all hostages unharmed. The 280 passengers and crew of Transglobal Flight 923 were evacuated to safety, while the hijackers were taken into custody by international security forces. Outstanding work, Captain Walsh, Admiral Chun said during the debriefing video conference. The Skybridge system performed exactly as designed, providing capabilities that neither human operators nor artificial intelligence could achieve alone. The operation had demonstrated the true potential of human-AI collaboration in complex military scenarios. The artificial intelligence had processed vast amounts of data and executed precise tactical operations, while human judgment had provided strategic direction and ethical oversight. Most importantly, the system had successfully protected civilian lives while achieving military objectives. Admiral, I think we've proven that the future of military aviation isn't about replacing humans with machines, Samantha said, reviewing the operational data from the rescue mission. It's about creating partnerships that leverage the strengths of both human intelligence and artificial intelligence. But the operation also raised new questions about the role of technology in military conflicts and the importance of maintaining human control over life and death decisions. The Skybridge system had prevented a tragedy, but it had also demonstrated capabilities that could reshape the nature of warfare itself. Dr. Stevens, the chief engineer, joined the debriefing from Patuxent River. Captain Walsh, the performance data from the operation shows that the AI systems operated well within their design parameters, but they also adapted to situations we never anticipated during testing. The artificial intelligence essentially learned new tactics in real time. The observation highlighted one of the most significant implications of the Skybridge program. The artificial intelligence was not simply executing pre-programmed responses, but actually developing new capabilities based on operational experience. This had profound implications for future military operations and the ongoing evolution of human-machine collaboration. That's exactly what we hoped would happen, Samantha replied. The AI systems are designed to learn and adapt, but always within the framework of human oversight and ethical constraints. What we saw today proves that this approach can work in the most challenging possible circumstances. 6 months after the South China Sea rescue operation, Samantha found herself facing yet another unexpected challenge that would bring her career full circle. She was back at the International Space Safety Consortium when NASA Administrator Dr. Patricia Williams called with an urgent request. "Captain Walsh, we have a problem with the Mars mission that requires your unique expertise," Dr. Williams said. During a secure video conference, "The autonomous systems we're using for the Mars habitat construction are based on the same AI architecture as your Skybridge program, and we're encountering similar human-machine interface challenges." The Mars mission represented humanity's greatest adventure, a KOTU. A Mars mission represented humanity's greatest adventure, a focused adventure, a KOMSA. Permanent settlement on another planet that would secure the species' future among the stars. But the mission's success depended on autonomous construction systems that would build habitable structures before the first human crews arrived. These systems were encountering problems that threatened to delay the mission by years. "Dr. Williams, I'm honored by your confidence, but I'm not sure how military aviation experience translates to Mars construction operations," Samantha replied. Though her mind was already working through the potential connections, "The principle is the same," Dr. Williams explained. "We need systems that can operate autonomously in hostile environments while remaining under human supervision and control." The Skybridge program proved that this kind of collaboration is possible, but we need to adapt it for civilian space operations. The conversation lasted 2 hours, during which Dr. Williams outlined the scope of the challenge. Autonomous construction. Robots on Mars were encountering situations that required human creativity and problem-solving, but the communication delay between Earth and Mars made real-time control impossible. The solution required a new approach to human-AI collaboration that could function across interplanetary distances. "The robots are incredibly capable," Dr. Williams explained, "but they keep encountering construction problems that require intuitive solutions. A foundation that encounters unexpected rock formations, structural elements that don't fit together as planned, environmental conditions that change faster than the programming can adapt. We need AI systems that can think creatively while remaining accountable to human oversight." Samantha realized that this was the natural evolution of everything she'd learned about crisis management and human-machine collaboration. From emergency landings to military operations to space construction, the same principles applied across all domains where human lives depended on technology working properly. "I'll need to see the current systems and understand the specific challenges," Samantha said. "But I think the solution involves treating the Mars construction robots like aircraft crews, autonomous systems that can handle routine operations while referring complex decisions to human supervisors." The next phase of Samantha's career would take her back to space, but this time as a developer of the systems that would make human settlement of Mars possible. It was a challenge that combined everything she'd learned about aviation, military operations, and crisis management into a single mission that could determine humanity's future among the stars. 5 years later, Captain Samantha Walsh stood in the Mars Mission Control Center at Johnson Space Center, watching as the first autonomous construction robots began building humanity's first permanent settlement on another planet. The systems she'd helped develop were working flawlessly, adapting to Martian conditions while remaining under human supervision from Earth despite the communication delays. "Mars Base Alpha, this is Houston Control," Samantha said into her headset. "Speaking to the AI systems on Mars surface. Construction sequence Alpha 7 shows green status. Proceed with habitat module installation." The response came 18 minutes later, delayed by the vast distance between Earth and Mars. "Houston Control, Mars Base Alpha confirming habitat module installation complete. All systems nominal. preparing for next construction phase. Around her, dozens of specialists monitored the construction progress using techniques derived from airline operations, military aviation, and space exploration. The lessons learned from Flight 447, the Skybridge program, and countless other emergencies have been incorporated into systems that would ensure humanity's survival among the stars. Dr. Jennifer Lopez, now a senior mission controller, approached Samantha's console with the latest status reports. Jennifer had completed her pilot training and served as a commercial airline captain before joining NASA's Mars program. Her career inspired by that first meeting with Samantha years earlier. Captain Walsh, the habitat construction is proceeding ahead of schedule, Jennifer reported. The AI systems are adapting to Martian conditions better than we projected, and the human oversight protocols are working perfectly. Through the Mission Control Center's windows, Samantha could see aircraft taking off and landing at nearby Houston Airport's commercial airliners, carrying passengers safely to destinations around the world using the safety protocols and training techniques she'd helped develop. The ripple effects of that afternoon in Seat 12B had spread far beyond anything she could have imagined. "Jennifer, do you ever think about how we got here?" Samantha asked, gesturing toward the displays showing human construction activity on another planet. 20 years ago, I was just a Navy pilot who happened to be on the right flight at the right time. "Captain Walsh, I think you're selling yourself short," Jennifer replied with a smile. "You didn't just happen to be in the right place. You were the right person for every challenge that came your way." Flight 447, the Skybridge program, the Mars construction systems, they all required someone who could think beyond the manual and adapt to situations no one had planned for. As the day shift ended and the night team took over Mars monitoring operations, Samantha walked out to the parking lot where her car waited. The sky above Houston was clear, and she could see the red dot of Mars shining among the stars, a distant world where machines, built by human ingenuity, were preparing the way for humanity's greatest adventure. Her phone buzzed with a message from Amy Chun, now the chief pilot at TransCon and one of the most respected leaders in commercial aviation. The message was simple but meaningful. "Watching the Mars construction coverage on the news. Proud to have served with you." The passengers of Flight 447 would be amazed to see where their story led. The message reminded Samantha that her journey was far from over. In 6 months, she would be boarding her own spacecraft as part of the advance team traveling to Mars to oversee the final construction phases. At 55, she would become one of the oldest people to travel to another planet, but her experience with crisis management and human-machine collaboration made her essential for the mission's success. As she drove home through the Houston evening, Samantha reflected on the path that had brought her from a nap in Seat 12B to preparing humanity for life among the stars. Every crisis had taught her something new about leadership, technology, and the incredible things that became possible when human creativity combined with artificial intelligence. But perhaps most importantly, she'd learned that the same qualities that made someone a good pilot: adaptability, calm under pressure, and the ability to make life or death decisions with incomplete information, were exactly the qualities humanity would need as it ventured into the cosmos. The story that began with an emergency landing had become something far greater, a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and the endless possibility that awaited among the stars. And as Mars grew brighter in the evening sky, Captain Samantha Walsh knew that the most incredible chapters of her story were still to be written. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the skies and beyond the stars. This epic tale of courage, innovation, and human resilience shows us that sometimes the most extraordinary adventures begin with the most ordinary moments, even a simple nap on a commercial flight. If this story captivated you as much as it did me in the telling, I have a favor to ask. Please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest epic narratives. These novel-length stories take weeks of research, writing, and production to bring you the kind of immersive storytelling that transports you to other worlds and inspires you to see the extraordinary in the everyday. Share this video with friends who love aviation, space exploration, or simply great storytelling. Leave a comment below telling me what part of Samantha's journey resonated most with you. Was it the emergency landings, the military operations, or her role in humanity's expansion to Mars? Your support through likes, shares, and subscriptions makes these epic stories possible. Every notification you enable, every comment you leave, and every time you share our content helps us continue creating these detailed, hours-long narratives that celebrate human courage and ingenuity. Until our next adventure together, keep looking up at the stars, and remember, you never know when your own ordinary moment might become the beginning of an extraordinary story. Subscribe now, and let's explore the infinite possibilities that await us together.